What's up guys, welcome back to the channel, and today I want to tell you about my Stryd footpod. And I realize that this just isn't showing you very much, but it's a pretty small and very handy tool. And the reason I want to tell you about it is because I was on a run with a friend the other day, and he asked me, Matt, aside from your watch, what is the one piece of running gear that you couldn't do without? And my answer was my Stryd footpod. So in this video, I'm going to be telling you about the Stryd footpod itself, because Stryd has just come out with a new one, the Next Gen Stryd footpod. And I'm going to be telling you what you can do with it and how it actually helps me. Oh, and before we get started, if you already use a Stryd footpod or any footpod, I want to hear from you. I want to know what you use, what you like about it. Let's get into it. Okay, first things first, the Stryd footpod will cost you $249, which I know is a little expensive. They have a little better deal. You can buy it for $149 if you have a 6-month membership, and that 6-month membership will cost you $9.99 a month for 6 months. And after that time, you've got no obligation to continue. So actually, you'd be an idiot not to take that, because that actually lowers the cost of your Stryd footpod to $210, and you get 6 months of membership for free. But I'm going to talk about some of the differences between a Stryd membership and not having a Stryd membership, because although I am currently a member of Stryd, I don't keep my membership current for the entire year. There are times when I use it and other times when I don't. At its very heart, the Stryd footpod measures running power. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about with a footpod, the footpod actually attaches to the front of your shoe. It looks something like this. See that? It is attached right to the front of these Metaspeed Sky Pluses, and from here it does all the magic. And I've been using Stryd for a couple of years now, and I can say that the Stryd footpod is my #1 training partner. It knows me better than any other device because the Stryd footpod is compatible with all the devices. Whatever watch you're using, it is highly likely that the Stryd will sync with it. So let's just talk about the hardware for a second, because this Next Gen Stryd footpod is the one that you are going to want to buy. Although it looks the same to the previous Stryd footpod, the Next Gen Stryd footpod is the Next Gen, and it has 5 times improved responsiveness for effective pacing. We're going to talk about pacing in just a second. It tracks your lower body stress, so the stress that goes into your legs from all that pounding from your running, it tracks it. You can change the running profiles now, so whether you're running on the road, on the trail, on the track, on a treadmill, indoors, you can choose a different profile to make sure you are getting the most accurate results. And I think because of the 5 times improved accuracy, the sprint accuracy has been increased for tracking your improvements in speed work. So the Next Gen footpod has a slightly different design. It looks the same on the surface, but we have a better backing. We've got, looks like some kind of metal on the back where it hooks into the clip, and of course it is full of their new sensors. The Stryd footpod comes with 2 clips to add to your shoe, so if you lose one, not to worry, you've got another one, and it comes in orange and black depending on your color preference. And it comes with a charging dock, which the Stryd just slots right into. You plug a USB-C charging cord into the back and you're good to go. I tell you, I hardly ever use this because the Next Gen Stryd footpod will also last up to 20 hours. The Stryd footpod is splash proof. I think it's actually IP68 compliant, but you can't use the Stryd footpod when you're running through streams, as if water is forced inside, pressure is going to be more than what the device can handle and you could break it. However, with my last generation Stryd, I did use it a lot at the beach when I was running and splashing through the water and taking those slow motion running shots, and I can anecdotally say that I didn't notice any difference in performance before and after I did that. I'm not telling you to do it, I'm just saying that I've done it and it still responded as it should. So I think there are several important reasons to consider getting a Stryd footpod. And I think for most of us, if you are really into your running data, you're going to appreciate the data that this gives you a lot more. But also, if you're concerned with accuracy, the Stryd footpod is going to be a lot more accurate than the GPS that comes from your watch. And the best part is it doesn't require any calibration. For me, I took it out of the box, put it on my shoe, went for a run, and it is extremely accurate. Now, when I test different watches, I will usually test the Stryd footpod as my baseline using a watch in treadmill mode, so I can see how close the GPS watches are to the Stryd footpod. And also, for obvious reasons, the GPS signal can often cut out on us if we're running around tall buildings, if we're running through the woods. That GPS signal can be a little laggy, and it can often be off. So let's say we're coming around switchbacks, it may not pick that up exactly. But the Stryd footpod works with your GPS, so you're still getting the pacing, you're still getting the distance data that's coming from the Stryd, and it's lining that up with your GPS track. So you're still going to get the GPS track when you have the Stryd footpod synced to your watch. Now, just briefly, I said it does sync to every watch. And by every, I mean like the bigger brands, Garmin, Polar, Chorus, Suunto, Apple Watch. But with Garmin and with Apple Watch, you can actually download the Stryd app, and that gives you a lot more data on your screens rather than just the power data that you get when you sync it to Polar, Chorus, and Sunto. So when you're using the Stryd app on an Apple Watch or on your Garmin, you can have the workouts sent to your watch and you see a beautiful display and you can go through your Stryd workouts. With that said, I do have a Garmin, I do have an Apple Watch, and I have never once used that feature. I do tend to stick to the workouts that I like and I know work for me, and I'm still wearing the Stryd footpod, so it doesn't really matter. All that data that I'm getting from my runs is going into Stryd, but I just want to let you know that those two watches, Apple Watch and Garmin, have the most in-depth view of your data on your actual watch. But I don't want that to put you off if you have another watch. Remember, I use a Chorus, it's fully compatible with the Stryd, and I get all that power data on my wrist from the Stryd footpod. Go ahead and ask me any questions about that in the comments if you want me to get a little deeper. So now we've talked about the hardware, we've talked about how you use the Stryd. Why would you want to use the Stryd footpod? And the answer is actually pretty simple, and that's power. Now, if you haven't measured your runs by power, it may not seem simple. You may be measuring your runs by pace, by heart rate, and that may seem simple to you because that's what you've always used. Typically, that's what everyone's used since we started tracking our metrics to measure and quantify our runs. But the Stryd footpod measures power, and ultimately, power is an instant representation of your running effort. And instant is a key word here, as is running effort. So there are a lot of key words in that statement, but a valuable part of the Stryd footpod is the instant representation. So you know how it goes. When you pick up the pace, let's say you're running intervals and they're fairly short intervals, it can take several seconds for your pace to catch up to what you're actually running. Now, if you're trying to get up to an interval based on a heart rate, that heart rate lag is absurd. A lot of times you're going to be done with that interval before your heart rate actually gets up to the target. That's where power really shines, because the second that you start picking up the pace, the number of watts that you are putting out instantly responds to your effort. But there's another reason, but it's not just picking up the pace, because the algorithm that powers Stryd and all the data that you put into it also gives you predictions on what you can run at your very best. And after a couple of runs, the Stryd is going to learn what you can do, and the more data you give it, the more accurate predictions the Stryd gives you back. So obviously, you're going to want to run a fairly long run, like an hour. You're going to want to run easy runs, you're going to want to pick up the pace, you're going to want to run really fast for short amounts of time, and you're going to want to do cruise tempo efforts. All of that data goes in, and the Stryd will come up with a critical power. Now, to make things very simple, your critical power is right around where your anaerobic threshold will be. So below that critical power, you're able to maintain pace while your body still clears lactate, and then above your critical power, you have a much shorter window of running, and that's where our lactate is going to increase, and we are just going to slow down because our bodies can't clear that lactate quick enough. So for me, the very best part of Stryd is that my critical power is automatically calculated and updated with every run, and then my race predictions and my pace zone predictions constantly being updated based on the most recent data that my critical power is based on. And that critical power is based on a 90-day window. So whatever you've done in about that 3 months is what your critical power is based on, so you know that it is very recent data. When you are training for a race and you're training hard, your critical power is going to increase. And then by the time you get to race day, you are able to accurately predict your race based on your most recent training. Now, it works the other way too. In your off season, when you're not training as hard, that critical power is going to drop, but that's okay. Because in our off season, we sometimes still want to do workouts. We're going to be running easier a lot more, and it's important that we stick to our right zones when we're training. And by training, ultimately, I mean our easy zone. We don't want to be running too fast, too often. And so based on my critical power, at the making of this video, Stryd tells me that my easy zone is between 241 watts and 297 watts. So when I have the power metric displayed on my watch, I know that if I keep it in that zone, I am running easy enough. And this is where the real benefit comes in, because your power takes into account the elevation, the gradient, how fast you're running, the air pressure, the wind, and it gives you a number. And this is where running by running power really shows its benefit. Because let's say, for example, you're running a marathon. And let's just say you're running the Boston Marathon, because last year I did run the Boston Marathon by power. So the Boston Marathon, as you know, is a fairly hilly course. It starts off downhill in the beginning, and then you come into the Newton Hills, where you're climbing for several miles, and then the last 10K or so, 5 miles, is pretty much downhill to the finish. So because I was running by power, that means that my pace is not going to be exactly the same throughout the race. When I'm running downhill, I need to run a little faster to keep my power output at the right zone. And the same thing goes when I'm running uphill. It takes more power to run uphill. So my pace is going to be slower even though my power is exactly where it needs to be. And this is going to help you run amazingly efficiently. Because if you're running by heart rate, you have to take into account things like cardiac drift. If your heart rate starts to get a little too high, it's going to be very difficult to bring it back down. And pacing, forget about it. On a hilly course, the worst way to run a race is by pace. Because let's say you want to run the Boston Marathon in 3 hours. That is a 6 minute and 52 second per mile average. Now in the beginning, those 6 minute and 52 second per miles are going to be very easy because it's all downhill. But once you get to about mile 16, when you hit the Newton Hills, it is going to be very difficult to maintain that 6:52 average going uphill. And you are probably going to wear yourself out. With power, Stryd gives you the number that you need to maintain to run a particular distance. And that's all you have to do is watch one metric for your entire race and you will perform to your potential. So personally, I found it quite surprising when I had to slow down so much running uphill. And then running downhill, I really had to hammer it in order to keep my power where it needed to be. And you might think, well, Matt, your effort's going up, your effort's going down. It's not. My effort is staying exactly the same. And I finished the 2022 Boston Marathon feeling better than I ever have at the end of a marathon. And that's because I followed one number, and Stryd's algorithm knew what my number was in order to get to that distance in the most efficient amount of time. And I followed it, and it worked out very well. So I just want to show you my Stryd account. I'm going to go through some of my data so you can understand what I'm looking at and the data that I'm getting and how it's going to help me plan my easy runs and how it's going to help me plan what pace I should run for races. So right now you're looking at the main screen of my Stryd. It says here my critical power at the moment is 372 watts. Now it is important to remember that if you have a Stryd or if you get one, you are not going to compare yourself to me or anyone else. My critical power is based off of factors like my age, my weight, my height. So everybody is going to be different. And it doesn't mean that if your critical power is higher, you're going to be faster. Just keep that in mind. So 372 watts is my critical power. With that number, my easy run, as we've already said, is 241 to 297. Which is 65 to 80% of my critical power. Then we've got a moderate zone, a threshold zone, which you can see the top of that threshold zone is 372, which is my critical power. And then the wattage above my critical power is reserved for intervals and reps. Here in the middle of the screen, we've got some recent runs that I've done. And this is my running stress balance, which ultimately tells you how I am recovering after my runs. Let's scroll down just a second. This is my running stress over the last 90 days. We can see that there have been some peaks here. For example, this was the Jacksonville Marathon, and this right here was the Punta Gorda Half Marathon. And obviously these peaks are some key workouts leading up to my marathon. If I scroll down just a little more, we come to the power duration curve. And again, this is based off of data for the last 90 days. And it's this information that is going to affect your critical power. If I scroll down just a little more, we can see the times at the bottom, all the way from 10 seconds all the way up to 3 hours. Ultimately, based on my training for the last 90 days, I know that for a 3-hour run right here, I can run about, looks like 336 watts, 337 watts. And we can see that that information was got from my run at the Jacksonville Marathon. So it's important for me to let you know that this prediction from Stryd of how fast you can run, or the running power or wattage that you're putting out for each of your workouts, so an easy run all the way up to intervals, this is only based on your runs. It doesn't take into account how you feel. So this is a key point, because if you're not feeling your best, or you're not feeling recovered, or you didn't sleep well the night before, or anything else, it's going to make it very difficult for you to hit your maximum power output that you're going for in any particular workout. So the Stryd is giving you pretty much theoretical data of what the best you can do based on your training for the last 90 days. Does that make sense? I hope I made that clear. Now, if I flick this little switch on the top for my modeled ability, we can see that the line is considerably higher. And ultimately, this is telling me that Stryd thinks that I can do better. My runs that my critical power is based off of have not reached my potential as far as Stryd is concerned. And this is good thing and a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. But let's go to the race prediction tool. And this race prediction tool is one of the premium features, so you only get it with a membership. And this is the main reason why I subscribe to Stryd on and off throughout the year. I usually do it a month or two before any upcoming race. So let's switch over here. It looks like Stryd right now, based on a completely flat marathon course, Stryd is predicting that I can run a 258.11. Now this is based on 93% of my critical power, which is 346 watts. And if you also remember, back on the Jacksonville Marathon, I was only running at 336 watts towards the end of my race. And on that race, I ran about a 310 marathon. So just because Stryd is telling me that I can run this, that is assuming that I've done everything right. I'm in tip-top shape, but still, over the years, I have found it to be extremely accurate. Stryd is also showing us that this estimated time is plus or minus 4 minutes. And that plus or minus 4 minutes takes into different weather accounts. It takes into different feelings, and by feelings I mean like individual feelings on the day. And then this race prediction tool also features different stats that you can input in order to get the most accurate data. So it has just defaulted that I have trained at 45 feet of elevation and I'm racing at 45 feet of elevation. The temperature that I trained at has been 53 degrees and I'm racing at 53 degrees, and also the humidity. All these criteria greatly affect how we're going to run any particular race. So for example, there are some preloaded courses in here, and if the marathon, half marathon, whatever race that you want to run is not in here, you can just upload a GPX file and Stryd will use that and make your predictions off of that. So it's going to get all the elevation data. But let's just go to verified courses and let's just pick the Boston Marathon because I've already run it and it's a fairly recognizable course. So if we look at this, based on my fitness right now, Stryd is predicting I could run the Boston Marathon in 2 hours, 59 minutes and 58 seconds. Look, honestly, I don't think that's possible, but we do have to look at the plus or minus 4 minutes. And I have to say that for me to run the Boston Marathon in about 3 hours and 4 minutes, I think that is within my grasp if everything went right. So for me, the 3 hours flat doesn't seem too far outside the realm of possibility, especially when I consider that plus or minus 4 minutes. Now we can see right here we've got my average output at 345 watts, and then we've got some lines on the graph. We can see that the course outline here with all the ups and downs, but the yellow line is the suggested power, the 345 watts. The white horizontal line is my critical power, and again, the beauty about power is that it remains constant. You only have to follow that one number. And then the blue line is my modeled pace, and we can see that the pace is up and down throughout the entire course. So let's just go up here at the beginning of the race. It is a very steep drop in the beginning. It almost feels like you're falling at the beginning of the Boston Marathon because you're running so fast. So Stryd is telling me that I need to be running at about 5:51 per mile pace at the beginning of the Boston Marathon. This seems a little fast for me. There is absolutely no way that I'm going to start the Boston Marathon at a sub-6 pace, but that's what it's modeling. That is what it's showing my potential to be. Then let's scroll down a little further and let's go to the lowest point. I think that is about here. As I'm climbing Heartbreak Hill, it says my pace is going to slow down to 7:11. Looks like, yeah, 7:12 is my slowest pace. So ultimately I'm going to be running faster on the downhills and slower on the uphills to maintain an even power output. So it kind of takes the responsibility away from heart rate or pace, because Boston and a lot of other courses out there are very difficult to run at an even pace. So let's briefly talk about the Stryd membership. Now it costs you $10 a month, and of course if you are buying it today, you are obviously going to take that 6-month deal because that's going to be the best bang for your buck, and it's going to lower the overall cost of your Stryd footpod. So there are some pretty explanatory charts which I'll put up on your screen right now, and you can see that if you don't pay for a membership, you're still going to get your critical power history, your post-run data, advanced metrics, run tagging, filtering. You're going to be able to put notes. You're going to be able to view your training chart. You're also going to get a getting started training guide, critical power, your workout execution. You're going to be able to sync from whatever watch you're using. You're also going to get power-based training plans and base building training plans. Now, what the membership allows you to do is to actually build your workouts. It's going to give you access to an entire library of workouts. It's going to let you build and analyze your entire training plan, and it's going to give you access to the entire collection of pre-built workouts, which you would just send to your watch and then go out and execute. Now on this chart you can see that everybody gets access to the power duration curve, which I think is one of my favorite things about the Stryd ecosystem, but you need to have the paid membership in order to get the workout recommendations, the race power calculator, your running stress balance, and ultimately just giving you a lot more data about the runs that you have done. Now of course this data is extremely useful if you are a data-driven athlete like I am. I really enjoy seeing all this data. However, it's not needed when I'm not in race mode, when I'm not training for a race. And that's the reason I will only subscribe to Stryd for, I don't know, 4 or 5 months of the year. Now for the rest of the year, I'm always using Stryd. Stryd is always gathering that data, and I always want to know what my power output should be for certain efforts. But I don't need to analyze my runs in the off season quite as much. And with that, I am sure you have a lot of questions. I am happy to answer whatever you come up with. If I don't know it, I will find it out. And if you have made it to this point in the video, why don't you drop the bicep emoji to indicate power? Drop that in the comments so I know that you've made it all the way to the end of this video. My name's Matt. This has been my review of the next generation Stryd footpod and what you get when you start using it. Be kind, be happy, run well. See you in a couple of days.